Dear Diary, today I take the next step in being an ADHD life coach at Indigo Hub. I can't believe it's happening. I want to build, create, and discover a place for us to truly be ourselves. I think this journey will be the Indigo Diaries. Dear Diary, welcome to the Indigo Diaries, and welcome to our series 3, The World Through Our Eyes, with your host, me, Natasha Hickling. The Indigo Diaries is a podcast for those who want to learn about ADHD through others and our own experiences. This week, we're back in series 3. I'm really excited to have another guest. We had a bit of a break from experts, and I did a few waffling episodes that I hope you found useful. But we kick it off, and this is not just any guest, right? Like, I know I say that quite a lot, but this is literally not just any guest. This is my best friend that I'm just so excited, and I just had to add that in there, is my best friend that I met when I was in Shanghai, and she's in South Africa, and I'm just beyond happy that she's here, and you'll see why. So we're doing a Starting the Conversation episode where we talk about experience of others and we discuss how to approach it, and we just start a conversation that is not talked about a lot. And today we're going to be talking about ADHD and its comorbid disorders. So, Alecia, welcome.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here. Hello, family, Indigo Diary family.
I love it. Welcome to the family. So let me tell you a bit about Alecia and then we'll get started. Alecia is 32-year-old South African. She has travelled the world, spending a large amount of time in the East. She returned to South Africa during the original COVID-19 outbreak, returning home with all 4 pets. She continues to work in education as an educator while developing her own online counselling business, Steppingstones Online counselling, predominantly aimed at the online market, as making time for oneself these days has truly become difficult. Alecia's passion for helping people has always been a part of her core, going into education, hoping to make a difference in at least one student's life a year, quickly realising there is a vast number of boxes being a teacher alone doesn't tick. So she wanted to help in a deeper manner, thus leading to her studying further and becoming a qualified counsellor and play therapist. And very excited to have you here to talk about kind of ADHD and comorbid conditions, which is not really talked about enough. And it's very, very, very important. I know that because I have comorbid conditions.
No, I completely agree with you. It's a very complicated diagnosis to actually give. But let me give you an idea of how I see someone who has ADHD and some of the best examples that I've heard people like sort of describe it as. But firstly, ADHD is complicated as best, and it creates this amazing complex individual. But to me, the best description have heard of an ADHD mind is, imagine going to a concert, right? And you're standing there and there are 4 stages and they're way too close to each other. And you're standing in the slap bang middle of this thing and you just can't figure out which stage to listen to. And it's just this constant buzz of noise. And you're like, no, but I want to plug into the rock and roll. I want to plug into the pop music. And you just can't figure out where you're supposed to plug into. And it becomes overwhelming. And all of a sudden you have all these emotions and you don't know what to do with them because where have they come from? And if that's too elaborate, it's like asking a 4-year-old to paint a picture in green, but only showing them yellow and blue. And they know that yellow and blue make green, but they don't know how to bring the 2 together. And it's very simple examples, but once you get that and you grasp it, you understand that it's just a slower processing. It's just a sensation of often just being massively overwhelmed. And if you can deal with that overwhelmness and you have the skills to break through that overwhelmness and that processing per se, then you've got the winning situation on your hands, because I believe people with ADHD minds are beautifully, intricately woven together to be able to survive, because it's something that's overlooked in your very young years. And nowadays, you can be very quick to diagnose and go, oh no, that one's got ADHD because they're fidgeting with it. Maybe dial the clock back, maybe he learns through a different manner and the kind of set of learner rather than somebody who has ADHD. So be careful with pre-diagnosing. Saying that, the reality is that ADHD is very commonly there, and it's got a lot to do with what we eat. It's got a lot to do with our fast-paced lifestyle, and it's got a lot to do with the fact that genetics has essentially, it's shifted from how we used to live in the past and how people used to just get by. So now we have a multitude of educators like myself who are very quickly going, oh, well, he's got ADD, he's got ADHD, and not knowing what it actually means. And having little people in the classroom struggle growing into adults who have never actually been heard or seen for who they are. Because it's easier to put them in boxes and go, well, we're going to leave them over there, and they've got a problem, we're not going to help them. Whereas at the end of the day, realistically speaking, again, I'm speaking on behalf of myself as an educator, it's my duty to step in there and give them the skills, which is why I leaned into play therapy and counselling, because it gives me a different insight to the mind of multitudes of different disorders, not only ADHD. But to bring it all back to ADHD, there are 3 specific different types, which I'm sure the internet knows about, but I'm going to mention them just so that I get it off my chest, you know.
You go.
It's basically, you have your hyperactive ADHD, right? Which is your impulsive person who just goes and just bashes the thing out of the ballpark without thinking, and therefore often getting into some sort of altercation. Then you have the inattentive ADHD, which, let's go, was commonly known as ADD. But that is your daydreamer, the person who can stare into space for copious amounts of time, and in that process miss a whole bunch of instructions. And then you get the combined one, which is a bit of both. The impulsive daydreamer is what I like to call it. And it's, for it to be diagnosed, you need to score 9 on your diagnostic testing. For the other 2, you need to score 6 on your diagnostic testing. Now, having said that, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't do diagnostic testing. I'm also not a psychiatrist that works to the chemicals in the brain, so I can't prescribe the medication. But being a counselor allows me to deal with a person and give them the skills and help them to alter their behavior. And basically, on the complete core of it, ADHD is a behavioral adjustment to, let's go for a normal.
I love how you use your fingers there. I love that. People always do that, but you can't see it. So I just wanted, she used her fingers to say normal. Yeah, I get you.
Oh, well, I'm speaking and I'm just using my body, okay?
You do.
Which brings me to the very first comorbid disorder that goes hand in hand with ADHD, and which is often the reason that it's difficult to diagnose. Both aspects, either ADHD or bipolar mood disorder.
Yeah.
But having said the name, right there you have the difference. ADHD is related to behavior, whereas bipolar is related to your mood. ADHD is chronic. It doesn't go away. It's there. It's not going anywhere. Okay? It's how you manage it that makes it beneficial. That's why ADHD can be medicated, but it's medicated with something very different from that which you would medicate somebody who suffers from bipolar. The problem being, when you have ADHD, a lot of what you are experiencing will be called mania, manic, which brings me back to bipolar. And if you know anything about bipolar, it's a pendulum swing from having complete depressive states to being completely manic, where you're buzzing and you're bouncing off the walls. So for that diagnosis to be made, you have to spend a lot of time with either your psychologist, most likely a psychologist who can do the diagnostic testing, to be able to give you the proper diagnosis. Going for once is not going to cut it. And the crux and the main difference between the two, again, I'm going to say it, bipolar mood disorder, meaning it's periodic. It's not constant. It's not chronic. Whereas ADHD is constant. The treatment for bipolar mood disorder is normally mood stabilizers, all right? Whereas for ADHD, it's either a non-stimulant or behavioral therapy or a combination of two. Often antidepressants are also provided, not to cure depression, but to sort of help with the brain functioning and the components of the mind. I have to say this and explain that if you have bipolar mood disorder, it is very likely that you could have ADHD. So 1 in 13 people who have ADHD could have bipolar. But 1 in 6 people who have bipolar could have ADHD.
Ooh.
However, that doesn't mean that everybody who has ADHD is going to have bipolar. So when these comorbid disorders are diagnosed, it is really important to get it done by a professional who absolutely focuses on being able to differentiate between the two. So an ADHD psychologist specialist or a bipolar specialist. Otherwise, they interlink. The main way to differentiate between bipolar mood disorder and ADHD, 3 main things really. And it sounds very simple, but if you don't have the trained eye and haven't spent a lot of time with the person that you're evaluating, you might get it, let's just go for wrong. So it's actually quite simple. There are 3 things. The spectrum within the mood, right? So the very happy, very sad, how frequently that happens, the grandiose gestures when you are having a manic episode, because it's not as simple as just being bouncing off the walls. It's everything is exaggerated.
Yeah.
The blue spot becomes this beautiful blue ocean, and what it's a spot against the wall. Like, come on, tone it down. And then, of course, the last thing is quite simply the lack of sleep. People who have ADHD don't necessarily suffer from insomnia, but if you are bipolar and you're having a manic spell, you don't care for sleep. That's why you have high highs and you can bounce off the walls, never have to put your head on a pillow and sleep. And then when you come off your high, that's why the crash is so absolutely dark and low.
Yeah. And
that's the difference between ADHD and bipolar mood disorder. So again, if you get diagnosed with both, it's not impossible, as I've stated already, but be sure to ask your psychologist to show you how they got to the point where you are diagnosed with both, or one over the other, so that you have the information you need to empower yourself. Because being bipolar doesn't mean, I use the word batty, that you're batty, okay? All it means is that you need a mood stabilizer. If you have ADHD and you have the tendency to be towards the bipolar spectrum, again, it can be helped with taking a simple tablet, which they will monitor when you get to a psychiatrist, and the chemicals, that's the one thing. Make sure that the chemicals that they prescribe to you do not clash, because you're working with your mind and your brain impacts so much more than just the way you see the world. So make sure that when your medication is prescribed, that you make sure that these things do not clash. So that's bipolar and ADHD. And it goes on because there's quite a lot.
No, and I just want to ask a few things about that because it's so interesting. And I like that I literally had this thought and then you said it, which is why we're friends. but you said what I've seen personally in my experience is that a lot of people are misdiagnosed, and that not only gives them the wrong information, but what you said about the chemicals is very dangerous, because I've seen a few people where they've been diagnosed with bipolar, but it was ADHD. Then they'll put mood stabilizers and it had dire effects. And that's why that thing that you were saying about these are chemicals in the mind, and it's good to, to get them right, because if it's not done.
When you get diagnosed with one or the other, you have to make sure that it's done by a proper trained professional. So I'm going to break it down again, just so that your audience is very well aware of how this works. If you have to break it down into tiers, your tier 1 person to work with psychiatric things, which is everything that happens in this tiny little cavity in our heads and our brain, okay, is your psychiatrist. They are medical doctors that focus on psychology, and they focus on the chemicals in the brain. So if you have bipolar mood disorder, that's who you're going to want to go to give you the correct mood stabilizer for you within the correct dosage that suits you. When you get diagnosed with ADHD, it will probably be along the lines of doing diagnostic testing with your psychologist, who would then have watched you over the amount of time. Getting to an ADHD diagnosis won't just be the psychologist, it will be the people who you spend your time with. Because the thing with ADHD is that, and this is not to take away from relationships that have been created, but ADHD often acts as a buffer. There's this wall around you where you're not sure who to let in, who not to let in, because who's going to accept me for who I am. And that comes through being sort of societally shaped in a way.
Yeah.
So it will be having your partner or your family, and in the case of a parent, taking a daily document of how things are happening in the person's life. Let's go for patient's life, so that they have a true reflection. When looking at bipolar, it's often the person who has to keep the mood diary, not the outsider.
Yeah.
Because the person is the one that is experiencing the feels and the highs and the lows. And we are all so good at wearing masks that you're not going to be able to lie to yourself, but you're going to be able to lie to your partner that you're going through a spell. So when it comes to ADHD, somebody else can keep your journal for you. When it comes to bipolar, you keep your journal for yourself, to be completely honest. And then to get that diagnosis right for both, you have to spend more than one session in the company of a truly trained professional that focuses on that specific field.
Yes.
Misdiagnosis, unfortunately, it does happen, and it's not ever necessarily going to completely wither away. And it is because of the fact that the symptoms are both very, very similar. The only place where the difference really lies is the frequency.
Yeah.
Like I said before, ADHD is chronic, and basically what chronic means is it's constant. You can't all of a sudden wake up one morning and no longer have ADHD and no longer have the ability, or the inability rather, to sit. I'm going to use the thing that comes to mind in a church service for an hour and a half, and all of a sudden, I walked out and I remember the whole thing. No, because that's not how the mind of a person with ADHD is necessarily programmed.
Yeah.
And whereas the person with bipolar mood disorder will be able to listen for the full hour and remember everything, unless they're in a manic spell and their whole minds are going zzz.
Yeah.
So it depends on their mood. It's mood orientated versus behavior orientated. And yes, the two do link at some point.
Yeah, they do.
When it comes to your behavior is a daily thing. Your mood is something that alters at the drop of a pin.
Yeah.
Like you have a nasty conversation with someone, and all of a sudden you've gone from the joyous person that you are to the least happy person in your planet, because it's definitely not the planet.
I love that. But yeah, and yeah, it does. And it's that thing of the frequency is key, because with people with ADHD, obviously emotional regulation, right, is a thing, which is obviously why it then gets picked up as bipolar. But with people with ADHD, it is very up and down, and it doesn't really stay up or down. And so like you said, the frequency is it's the set, all the time. But it with bipolar, it comes on, right? ADHD we've had since childhood, and that's why other people are such a key there.
No, for sure. The only thing that I also need to mention about bipolar is that it's with ADHD, you have to have your regulation, your emotional regulation, because what does happen is you get hyper focused, especially with your impulsive types. So that would be your impulsive type, your hyperactive type, and then your combined type, which is a bit of both. Your daydreamer with impulsivity. What happens there is that emotions trigger some action. Let's say a friend on the playground kicked the ball in the wrong direction. That child's day is shot. They cannot stop thinking about that ball going in the wrong direction. That becomes their hyper focus. With a person who has bipolar mood disorder, they spend 2 to 3 weeks in a dark pit. And then all of a sudden that pit's gone and they spend 2 to 3 weeks manic, not needing to sleep, just absolutely going off the rocker. So if you compare those two things, I think that it gives you a better example of how it all could go misdiagnosed, could go wrong. So I think realistically speaking, it is very difficult to differentiate the diagnosis, but if you know what you're looking for, it's I won't say unlikely, but it's not going to be as common.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? That's the key thing here, is when you know what you're looking for.
That's why it's so important to get to the right people. I just want to bring it back. When you get diagnosed with these two things, make sure that you ask your practitioner to double check that your chemicals that you're taking, because those are what the pills are, the chemicals that your body doesn't naturally regulate, that they don't clash. You don't want to give yourself a third something because you've got two somethings. Make sure that your medication dosage is accurate and that the two medications that you take don't clash. That's all. No more.
I love that. That's all. I'm done. Drop the microphone. Walk away. I love that. But brilliant. No, but it's such fun. And I hear about ADHD and learning difficulties, but this is one that I don't hear talked about very often at all. So I'm really glad that you've spent the first part, and this is the first one you've mentioned.
No, for sure. I think that it's for anyone who suffers with mental illness, the very first thing that your general practitioner is going to ask you, oh, okay, right, so are you manic? No. Are you depressed? No. Are you manic and depressed? No. And they don't understand where these questions are coming from. But it's to establish whether you could possibly be bipolar. And if you can answer those questions honestly for yourself, you walk into whatever situation you have to walk into, and you can give general and honest feedback, which will help whoever has to diagnose you. So it's about knowing yourself at the end of the day to be able to get the right help, because that's why we're here. We're here because we want to help. That's why I do what I do anyway. I'm sure that's why you do what you do.
That's why that's why we're here. That's why we're friends. That's one thing we have in common.
We do what we do because we want to make it easier for other people.
So what's next?
So just be aware of bipolar. It is on the spectrum of people who suffer from ADHD, but it's not something that will floor you completely. I'm going to move on if you'll let me.
So what's next? What's next?
What's next? Okay, so I'm going to look at it from the perspective of a teacher and a mom or a parent that's just heard, listen, this child has been diagnosed with ADHD. And it's a combination of defiant disorder and conduct disorder. Now, immediately when I say that, you're like, oh my hat, you're going to talk to me about children that don't obey me? Why do I want to hear about this? Well, the reality of the matter is that many of the children who are diagnosed with ADHD actually don't necessarily have ADHD. They have either defiant disorder or conduct disorder. And this doesn't mean that children who have ADHD don't have this as a comorbid disorder. It just means that you need to dial it back. So let's look at what it means. Defiant disorder is literally a child that defies an instruction. They just couldn't care less. And conduct disorder is slightly more aggressive and a person who, out of general perspective, just is going to violate the rules. Now, why do they go hand in hand with ADHD? Reality, a person with ADHD is going to struggle to follow a verbal instruction if it's got 10 steps. When you get to step 3, they've already forgotten what you said for step 1.
Step 2, me.
You see? I got it. No. And that's what's really sad. Because the reality of the matter is that the child with ADHD doesn't want to defy you. This is where the complete and utter opposite thing happens. They start striving for perfectionism and wanting to just do it right, and then it builds up anxiety. But we'll get to that towards the end of it. We'll get there, okay? But when you look at defiant disorder, it's generally a child who is just uncooperative. They become hostile, they don't want to do it, and they, on their own accord, just want to defy the authority figure. Now, the difference between a child that has ADHD and defiant disorder is that the child who has ADHD actually wants to do what you've told them to do. They just can't remember or focus long enough on the instruction that's given. It doesn't mean that they don't want to achieve the outcome. It's that you actually have to slow down your instruction giving. Give it 2 instructions at a time if it's a 10-point instruction, and they will actually be able to achieve what you wanted them to achieve. However, a child with defiant disorder is hostile. They immediately get angry, and they will immediately sort of retaliate and just completely do the opposite of what they've been instructed to do. Because it's not an attention thing. It's not an inability to focus. It's a, I want to irritate, for lack of a better expression. It's not necessarily the most accurate expression, but that's what they did. And that's what drives parents and teachers and authority figures absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And that's where the two get confused. Because a child who isn't necessarily being defiant, but is incapable of following the instruction, will be viewed as defiant. And they're not.
No.
That's why you have to look at the whole child. Is this a constant thing, or is this something that happens when I give a set of 5 to 10 instructions to follow? Write the date in the left-hand corner. Make sure you underline the date. Number 1 to 10 in the left column. They've lost you at underline.
Yeah.
So it goes with providing the parent with the correct skills to deal with a child, as well as the person who spends up to 6 hours with the child, being their educator. So they need to know which one of the 2 disorders it is. Is it ADHD or is it defiant disorder? So basically, when you look at ADHD, we know that we can medicate. It's not the crux of everything. It's not going to fix everything. You're going to need therapy alongside that to regulate all the other things. But it opens a door to allow the child, the person, whomever, to feel in control of being able to follow the instructions, able to complete the task. Whereas a person who has defiant disorder is going to need a little more along the lines of cognitive behavioral therapy, choice therapy. What are the consequences of my actions? If I'm going to defy this person or this authority figure, what's actually going to happen to me? Which boils down to one thing: remorse. If you put a child with ADHD and a child with defiant disorder on the playground, and the child with ADHD accidentally knocks over a friend, in that moment, it's not necessarily realized what they've done. But they'll turn around and they'll apologize. I'm sorry. Whereas a child that has defiant disorder doesn't necessarily want to apologize. They don't necessarily care what they've done. And that's where we have to be so careful to look at a child with ADHD and go, well, you're defiant. No, not necessarily. I might just not be able to control that movement in that space. And that actually runs into the whole concept of dysgraphia, which is the next thing I'm going to speak about.
I've got a question before we go on to the next one. Or comment. Ross Green is quite a famous person. He said that want versus can't. And I think that was quite key there, because people with ADHD want to do it, but they just might not be able to do it. But someone defines it's the opposite. They probably can do it, but they just don't want to.
That's exactly it. No, that's exactly it. You've summed it up beautifully. And what makes this actually a little bit scary is that defiant disorder and conduct disorder are predominantly male. They predominantly show in your male sufferers from ADHD because it's related to aggression. That does not mean that ladies don't suffer from the same thing. And what happens is that as the people age, we'd like to go that ADHD is like allergies. You outgrow them. You don't. You grow with it, and you learn skills, and you learn to cope. So that's where a child that has massive anger issues that doesn't necessarily have ADHD will outgrow those anger issues. But a person who has ADHD and conduct disorder or defiant disorder is going to need therapy to teach them, okay, I can feel the anger inside of me. How do I break it down? How do I regulate this emotion rather than hyper-focus on it? And how do I then make sure that I don't act out on it? Because the reality of the matter is that when you look at conduct disorder, which is similar but different from defiant disorder, it's a persistent pattern of behavioral violations towards others, but not others, the rights of others. Yeah. It's not respecting the other human for being human. It's looking at them and going, okay, well, I can do whatever I want to, and I'm going to blame Johnny in the back corner and say he did it. It's not wanting to take responsibility for that action, which is different from a person with ADHD, because they actually want to go, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do that. It wasn't my intention to do that. It sort of just happened. Yeah. And again, it's exactly what you said. It's I'm not able, but I want to. Yeah.
And that's the key there. Yeah.
So I think the reality is, when you come to things like conduct disorder and defiant disorder, you have to make sure that when you look at a child or an adult, because it doesn't end in childhood, that you're sure that it's not on purpose, because that's where the difference lies. The person with ADHD doesn't want to hurt another person on purpose.
No. And she said it loud and clear there. Yeah.
That's it, really. However, statistics show, unfortunately, that majority of children can suffer with defiant disorder. Between 30 and 50% of people who have ADHD are going to struggle with defiant disorder. And, like I mentioned already, it is predominantly more male.
Yeah.
People, children, humans, because of the aggression that is with it. Again, if that is the case, it is not a full stop. It's a let's give you the skills, let's get you the behavioral therapy, let's train your parents. One of the actual processes of getting a handle of this is making sure that the parents and the teachers and the adults in that child's life, and therefore the people who accompany you on your journey, even if you're an adult, your partner, go with you to get behavioral therapy. It's called behavioral management application, basically. So that you learn, as the person suffering with this, that, hey, it's not okay, and I can't use my ADHD as an excuse for my bad behavior.
Yeah.
It's
well said.
Not on.
Well, with that note, we're going to take a break and we're going to come back. Very interesting. I've wrote so many notes down for myself. Like, this is like learning. I've learned like 5 different, I love analogies, me and you brilliant. You can tell we're friends. So I've literally wrote loads of notes down. So I hope you're getting used to this. We're going to take a break and then we're going to come back and we're going to start with dysgraphia. And we're out.
If you would like any more information on Indigo Hub or our Indigo support group, then please check out our website below or our link to our social media platforms, or email at indigohub.adhd@gmail.com. If you would like to offer any comments, feedback, get support, or if you're interested in the world hearing your story, then please reach out through any of our avenues. As said before, have a positive week. Check in again later. And we're out.
And we're back, and just like any old person, but actually we did quite a good job out as like a whole thing in that break is usually we end up spending half the time talking in the break, and it's like maybe we need to record, but we were actually quite good. I was quite impressed. We actually took quite a short break. I'm quite impressed with that. So anyway, we're back. If you've not listened to the first half, then please go back. Like, come on. Go back to the start, and we're back with Alecia, one of my best friend, and she was telling us all about ADHD and coexisting conditions, and we're back with talking about dysgraphia. So jump.
Hi guys. Yeah, I really enjoy having these chats with Tash. My brain works overtime. She keeps me on my toes. So here we go. Dysgraphia. So generally, when one is diagnosed with ADHD, it happens when you're slightly younger in your life. So normally after the age of 7, if you've had a half-decent teacher that's picked up on it at some point and has, brought your parents to the attention, like you're struggling a little, then these things come about. But what definitely goes hand in hand with a person that could be struggling with ADHD is dysgraphia and dyslexia. And I just want to explain basically the basic issues with dysgraphia. Immediately people go, oh, it's somebody who can't write. No, it's somebody who has a difficulty with their graph motor. Okay, so we know fine motor and gross motor, yay, little movements, big movements, fantastic. Graph motor has to do with your ability to essentially plan your movements, okay, and has to do with your hand-eye coordination. So why would that cause dysgraphia? Well, if you are predominantly right-handed and you have to figure out how to use your hands, and you only have your left eye that's strong and your right eye is weak, you get a whole different perspective on life. For example, if you are, let's go left eye dominant, and you're sitting on the left side of the classroom, you're only going to see half the board, which means you're not going to be able to copy correctly, which means that when you have to hold a book in front of you, you're also only going to necessarily see the left side of the book, which brings us to being able to then write. Our eyes are phenomenal. They are created to work together. When we only have one eye that works really well, our entire movement planning, our space planning, our everything is off key and off balance, which then brings us to not being able to write and form letters properly, which is okay. So they have a bad handwriting. No, they don't have a bad handwriting. They are able to use their fine motor skills to recreate what we would call graphemes, which is your sounds on paper, your letters, you must. And the scary statistic is 59% of all people who are diagnosed with ADHD have this problem. They have the dysgraphia problem. And it's not their inability to write or not wanting to write. It's that their fine motor skills, sorry, but their, help me, the hand-eye coordination hasn't been refined. So what do? We're all people, right? And if we look at which muscles to strengthen if you have ADHD and you want to bring in a bit of sportiness and blah, 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 it's your core. And what we've happened to do as adults and growing up, we're glued to our phones. They're right in front of our faces. So our shoulders hunch over. Our eyes no longer have to move from side to side. Well, if you are like we are, we read from the left to the right. Unless you're an Arab, then you read the other way. But we no longer have to make those big movements with our eyes. And what we then do is we strengthen the muscles in our necks, and we rather turn our heads, and we forget to practice the muscles in our eyes. So dysgraphia isn't something you can fix per se, but if you do vision therapy and you train the little muscles in your eyes to work, then you get your movement planning not right, you get it better. Because that's the whole thing. We just want to do it better. And you get your hand-eye coordination better. Because there's no point at looking up and seeing something only on the left side because only your left eye works, but you write with your right hand. Because predominantly that's what we want. We want people to write with their right hand. I'm not quite sure why I never got that.
Because it's right. Because it's right.
Okay, because it's right.
Ba-bum.
So, just realistically speaking, dysgraphia isn't the end of your world. It's just, almost want to say it's a muscle thing. And if having a strong core and having your feet on the floor so that you're grounded and you're sitting on a ball, if you're a person who has ADHD, so you're forced to straighten your body so that your spine is in the right space, so that your brain is in the right space, so that nothing is pressing on the wrong parts of your body, then it would make sense that dysgraphia is related to your muscles. Now, again, it's not something that can be completely cured overnight, but with the correct form of therapy and the correct, let's go for correction of using your whole body, it can be improved. Again, it's not writing neatly. It's not being able to use your body in the right way. And that's being trained. It's like having to regulate your emotions. You have to be trained to regulate your emotions if you don't know how to do it naturally.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect. Dyslexia sort of flows into dysgraphia because if you reverse your letters or you reverse, well, dyslexia is in numbers, but if you were to reverse those, how are you going to write them properly? Again, they have a variety of overlapping symptoms, and you can be diagnosed with dyslexia and not be diagnosed with ADHD. I've got dyslexia and I don't have ADHD. And
I have both.
naughty badges for you, Tash. They have a variety of overlapping symptoms, and basically what that is that it's your processing. Okay. If you have dyslexia, it's the speed of your processing. If you have ADHD, again, it's the speed of your processing. It's the way that your memory functions. So, like I said earlier, if you give a set of verbal instructions and a person is not necessarily an auditory learner, they'll forget by step 2 what you said step 1 was. So it's that idea of working with their memory, and that's the same thing with dyslexia. It's the working memory that doesn't necessarily immediately retain what you shared or what you've read. And then it's your motor skills. Again, motor skills refers to your muscles. So dyslexia, again, isn't something that you can fix. In fact, it's something that you live with for the rest of your life. And there are therapies that can help your eyes, which is similar therapy that you would use when you have dysgraphia, making sure that the correct muscles in the upper part of your body are being used when you interact with text, when you interact with things far away from you. Like, I'm not talking about your eyesight. Please make sure. I'm not talking about the 20/20 vision, whatever the case may be. I'm talking about the actual muscles that make sure that all your senses are working properly. So 3 out of 10 people who have ADHD have dyslexia. And it's got to do, once again, with using your muscles in the other part of your body properly. And it's just tiny little things behind your eyes that move your eyes from left to right. They actually do a lot more than we think they do. And if we haven't trained them properly, we're going to sit with problems. And like I said, if it is as simple as having a very strong core, not to remove ADHD, because remember, ADHD is I don't want to say it's a problem, but it's a beautiful pathway in your brain. If having a core, a strong core, is simply all that you need to make your pathway in your brain even more beautiful, then everybody would have had a yoga ball and their feet on the floor.
And sit-ups.
Okay, it doesn't cure it, it simply helps.
Strengthens
And that's why I'm saying neither dysgraphia or dyslexia necessarily think it can be cured, but with the right assistance and the right training, we can make it better.
Yeah. And that just, I just wanted to clap about 4 times in that, because I see that I relate to that a lot. But it's that thing of a lot of all this, you can't get rid of it, right? It's there, but you can learn to live with it and learn to thrive with it and strengthen the muscle, like your core. And that's the key thing there. But I mean, there was a lot there that I didn't know about dysgraphia, especially. So yeah, thank you. So what's next?
You're welcome. So dysgraphia and dyslexia are obviously things that we would pick up when we were at school going age.
Yeah.
Right? So what happens when you are all of a sudden diagnosed with ADHD, dysgraphia, and dyslexia all at once? What do? Can you just climb in the nearest boat and row your boat ashore and be done with life? No, you don't. But what does happen when you are constantly reminded of the fact that you want to try, you want to achieve, you want to, and you just don't get there? Eventually, you develop anxiety. And anxiety and ADHD are almost inseparable, because we live in a society that has pushed things to be pristine, cookie cutter, Barbie doll, Ferrari, like that, sleek line, just go baby, go. It ain't work like that.
No.
So when you find yourself in a situation where you are constantly applying yourself holistically and you're getting nothing right, you develop an anxiety, a constant worry, a constant feeling of being on edge. It may actually even cause you the inability to focus. So now you've got ADHD, which is already making it difficult to focus, and now you have anxiety on top of that. And you can be misdiagnosed with being an anxious person when you actually have ADHD, or vice versa. But they go together. My best way of describing this is, if you constantly want to bake biscuits, and you want to bake the nicest biscuits because you're going to sell them as a scout somewhere on the street, go for it, but you forget to add the milk. You can't. Then you make the next batch, and that time you forget to add the eggs. Another flop. And all you want to do is get it right. Eventually, by the time you've made your 4th batch, you're just like, I can't do it anymore, I give up. And through that happening constantly in your life, anxiety develops, and you build this resistance. And what I've noticed is there are a number of things that happen. People pleasing develops, which essentially causes chronic lying, because you just want everybody to like you, because you don't feel like you fit into the norm of society, the general society. So now you're anxious about people accepting you. So you do whatever you can to have them like you for the version you've created to suit them, not who you are. Or you become perfectionistic, and perfectionism drives you. And everything has to be literally cookie cutter. If it's not cookie cutter, you have a meltdown. or you just build such a big wall around you, you don't let anybody in whatsoever. And these aren't things that are necessarily only related to people who have ADHD. This is anxiety in general. But when you add the two together, where you have someone who has constantly been trying to achieve something, and they've planned it, they've scheduled, I'm going to do those 5 things tomorrow, and by tomorrow 5 o'clock, none of those 5 things are done, because realistically speaking, I mean, Tash, you're an ADHD sufferer, but you start something and you can't fix it. I'll finish it, per se. So you'll start cooking the rice, and then all of a sudden the dog's barking, and you forget the rice, so you burn it, but now you're outside with the dog, and then the cat's climbing up the tree. And it's just, start something, don't finish it, and that constant feeling of not being able to achieve eventually floors you, and you're like, but I can't achieve. So you develop this worry that you're never going to be able to do anything right, that you're never going to be able to focus enough, that you're never going to be able to apply your concentration in the right places. And that worry doesn't dissipate, it doesn't go away, it actually just becomes more and more and more. And eventually it's anxiety. And now you're sitting with headaches, stomach aches, you're eating your fingernails into oblivion, you're constantly saying yes to things you can't actually do, not because you're not capable, because you don't have time, because you've forgotten how long it takes you to complete one task. And then your anxiety rolls in, and it unfortunately develops into depression, which is the last thing I want to talk about.
I'm going to go on to the anxiety. Sorry, I always have many comments. I always say that something that I really like that you've talked about here, well, many things. Can't name them, we've got time for that. But is that the thing that I think gets talked about a lot is ADHD challenges, like not such all the ADHD, but I always say, I call it the impacts of having ADHD. And that's what you've talked about, the impacts of having ADHD and then in this world, and then failing, not getting there, not doing the cookies, which then causes anxiety that leads to the depression and stuff. But I think that bit is not talked about enough, because it's all about, let's get better at this, but the anxiety of the impact of having ADHD in this world creates so much other stuff, which is what you're talking about, which I just thought was really key.
No, but you're right. That's the thing, is that it's the foundation of it. So we live in a world, right, where we all have to be somewhat the same as something we've experienced. Either similar to our parents or similar to the school we went to. We have to fit in somewhere. And this is where I completely go against society. I believe everybody's unique. I believe that everybody has a place within society. I believe that your general makeup, whether it's genetic, whether it's your choices in life, that shaped you to benefit somebody else down the path. Because I do believe that when we move into directions, we come across people where we deposit what we've learned, and they take it further and they deposit it in the next places. But when you suffer with something like anxiety, you withhold that from the world. And because we live in this place where we're all supposed to be, I don't know, Ken and Barbie, if you want to be like that. It's the only example I could think of right now, okay? You're welcome to laugh at me. But what then happens is that if you hear from the age of 7 that you can't, and you are placed right in front of the classroom, your corner is the only corner with no pictures on the wall. You already know by the time that you get your test back that you work to get 100%, but you only get 45%, because, hey, hang on, I've got dyslexia. I didn't understand that whole question, but I was too scared to ask because the teacher has already made a point of making the whole class know that, you know what, I can't write. Or I can't read the questions, I don't understand. So immediately, instead of asking for assistance, we withhold. And so the anxiety grows. I'm going to write this test, done everything I can to prepare. And I refer a lot to school and how things happen in a classroom, because that's where I live this every day with my students, with my colleagues. But it doesn't only stay there. It actually metamorphosizes with us into our adult life.
Mm.
Having a dinner party and having shifted anxiety to perfectionism, every glass has to be sparkly. Oh, dang, I've only got 4 knives, but there's 6 people coming, and you freak out because the knives can't be different. But you've actually got 10 in the drawer, but only 4 match. Now, which grocery store is going to sell knives at 9 o'clock at night? These things happen, and they are enhanced when you have spent from the age of 7 up being told that you should do better. Come on, just read the question. Come on, why are you kicking the wall? I'm frustrated. Why are you frustrated? I can't tell you. Not because you don't want to, because you haven't actually got the skills to be like, I'm frustrated because I'm constantly being told that I can't do it. But you can. You actually can. The people who are around you don't know how to help you.
Yeah.
So I think when it comes to anxiety, and it definitely is something that's very common now outside of ADHD.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
In general society, we live in with COVID and the Ukrainian war and all these things that I don't really want to mention. But put that in a box next to a person who's already anxious about constantly trying and not succeeding and not being acknowledged for wanting to and not being able to, because they're different.
Yeah.
They're massively different. Put that with that person, and you're going to have a beautiful explosion of frustration, of anger, of not wanting to get out of bed in the morning, because what if I just can't make that cup of coffee right? I mean, he said 2 sugars. I've only put 1 in. And you start beating yourself up, and so the anxiety grows, and anxiety can floor you. So combine that with ADHD, combine it with a constant feeling of not being able to succeed, and you actually start questioning your own worth, which brings me to depression. We got there. So depression is something that actually is really dear to my heart, just because it's quite bad for my own family and for myself as well. But it's often misunderstood, and it's not your everyday sadness. It's a really deep, dark blue pit that it doesn't matter how hard you try to smile and pretend that everything's okay. It's not. And it can be helped through a million different things. When you have a case of ADHD and you struggle with low self-esteem and low self-worth already because you've gone through an entire education system that told you that you're not enough. What you're doing is not enough. You should do better. Then when you get to being an adult, or you get to having to just accept the fact that my enough is not necessarily the world's enough, is something that can eat at you, and it can make you particularly sad. Depression is something that is 30%, let's go for common, amongst people who suffer from ADHD. You can have it in a severe form, or you can have it in a mild form, but it's that sadness that you carry with you of, I can't achieve, I'm not enough, the person I am is not going to ever amount to the aspirations or the expectations of the people around me or of myself. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that's fair.
No.
And the reality is, again, if you have ADHD and you suffer from this almost overwhelming sadness, and you start looking at why you suffer from the overwhelming sadness, you're taking back your own. You're realizing that, you know what? I am enough. I'm enough with my limitations. In fact, my limitations make me beautiful, and they make me able to relate to other people. My limitations are helping me to support others who have different limitations, but because I have to deal with my limitations, I can appreciate theirs. And I think that it's a point of compassion, genuinely. But it's something that comes with being constantly stressed, being constantly worried. That's why anxiety can metamorphosize into depression. But it is quite unfortunately common among people who have a low self-esteem, who feel like they're not worthy. And you can treat it, of course. Like you can treat ADHD with medication, you can treat depression with medication. But the most powerful thing that I believe is talk therapy. And if you combine regulating emotion, talk therapy, and medication, you're actually setting yourself up for a massive amount of success. Yeah. Because realistically speaking, you're learning to accept the beauty of you. You're learning to accept that your limitations are actually your stepping stone and your foundation into this world to make it a better place. And I holistically believe that we're all here to make the world a better place. Even if our world consists of 4 people, there are 4 people that are going to benefit from your story. Yeah. So if you look at it from that point of view and you get the right help and you work towards it, then you're going to be okay. And when getting diagnosed with depression and having ADHD, again, very similar to bipolar, make sure that there are no contraindications with the chemicals that you're taking. You can take antidepressants when being on ADHD medication. Just make sure that it's not a suppressor, stimulant suppressor, and then something that stimulates. Like they have to work together. The antidepressants that you could take if you were to be medicated will take longer to work on a person who has ADHD who is on non-stimulant medication for focusing purposes. They will take longer, but they will work eventually. However, medication is not the only cure. You need to be able to identify that, okay, I'm suffering, I am sad because I feel like I'm not enough. I feel like I'm not enough because when I was, let's go back to the source of the situation, I was 7 and I couldn't do the math sum. My teacher threw a roll of sellotape at me. Not taking into consideration that I only heard the first 2 things she said, and she said about 10. Not taking into consideration the fact that I was doing my very best, that I just couldn't get there. And so I have dealt with that ever since. And every different class I move into, something similar has happened. And so instead of turning out and being like, you know what? Maybe this just isn't for me and I need to try something new. I've gone, I can't do it. And I carry it over my head for the rest of my life as something that I can't do. And I can't does not exist. I can, just not yet. So brilliant. I think when you are diagnosed with depression, if you suffer from ADHD, if you are diagnosed with depression, you suffer from ADHD, it's really important to dial it back and to look at where it comes from and what's the source. Because at the end of the day, what you have to do is you have to accept yourself. Limitations, no limitations, and look at them as diamonds in the making, because they open part of you to sparkle with the rest of the world, so that they can learn from you, and they can learn through you being vulnerable in that moment, whether it is because you're dealing with bipolar and ADHD, whether you have conduct disorder and ADHD, whether you have dysgraphia and dyslexia and ADHD, or just one of the comorbidities. At the end of the day, it's something that places you in what I believe is an advantageous position to relate to people who struggle in this world. That's what we all do constantly. Yeah. But just before we end all.
Oh, I'm just going to ask you a question. Wait, I'm going to cut you. I was going to ask you, so you want to now you've kind of gone, I'm sorry, I'm a bit speechless. So you've got, that doesn't happen very often. So you've you've made me speechless. I'm literally like, got so much notes here. So you've gone through the 5 kind of things that you wanted to go to. Is now I wanted to ask you about like from you as a counsellor, how would you profile a client with ADHD?
So that's the thing. When establishing a ADHD profile for someone, okay, taking into consideration I'm a counselor, not a psychologist, so I'm not doing the diagnostic testing, but you would come to me, say to me, I've been diagnosed with ADHD, and then I would look at you, chat with you, listen to what you have to say, watch your body actions, whatever the case may be, and then I would try and figure out which one of the three you have according to me. You'll come to me and say, I've been diagnosed with ADHD, and I'll be like, okay, have they said to you that you're impulsive? Have they said to you that you're inattentive? Or have they said to you that you're combined? If you can't answer that or tell me that's what you have, then that's my job to be like, okay, I'm one of the three. You're one of the three. Let's figure out the skills that we can give you so that you can be happier and feel like you're surviving better within this world when it's crazy pace and all these things. Then it's really important to create a timeline. I would like to sort of get to know you and get to know at what point in your life this become a hurdle, because it's different for everyone. I'm saying that it's something that will predominantly come up when you are in mainstream education. But that's not necessarily the case. It might be something that comes up earlier in your life and your parents don't quite know how to deal with it. Or it's something that you struggle with as an individual when you only get to your teens. So I would like to look at the timeline. How long have you been dealing with it? What have been the scope of consequences of having this? And what has it done to you as an individual? Because it's all good and well to go, okay, cool, you've got ADHD. Let's try and give you some focusing meditation. Let's give you some mindfulness tips. At the end of the day, ADHD comes with having to survive in a world that has a pre-consisting idea of what it means. So dial that back, peel the onion back, get to the core, and make you look at yourself and be like, okay, I can work with this. So to get a timeline takes you back to the root of where it started. And then you can sort of build on and get to know how having this diagnosis has shaped you, per se. And then I think that it's really important to document. They're called outbursts, but I don't like that term. It's more a case of taking notes and watching to see, okay, when are they, the patient or client experiencing these things? After what is the outbreak, if you must? When does it take place? Why does it take place? And then look at it as, okay, this is when they're acting impulsively, or this is when they're spending all the time daydreaming. Because realistically speaking, those things only happen when a certain expectation is required. And if you can figure out that if that expectation is hanging in front of you like a carrot in front of a donkey, that this is what freaks you out, then skills can be given to be like, okay, where it's going to take a person who doesn't have ADHD 3 minutes to complete the task. It might take me 30 minutes to complete the task, but I'm going to complete it. Because the idea is to start something and end it.
Yeah.
And get that satisfaction of, I have succeeded. Let's go for make your bed. I get distracted making my bed. I've got 4 cats. They run riot around me. So when the one decides that they want to get in the bed, I no longer make the bed. I go make a cup of coffee. And when I come back, I'm like, oh, I was supposed to make the bed. And I'm the supposed normal human being. So it's just getting that satisfaction of starting a task, completing the task. If that is your hurdle, it might not be. You come, you tell me what your hurdles are. I watch you and I tell you what you're not telling me. And then we work together. At the end of the day, that's what it is. We work together. And because of the nature of what I do, is ADHD preventing you from creating new relationships? Or is it resulting in existing relationships disintegrating? Then what we have to do is we work on the patient, the client, to communicate their frame of mind with the people they want to connect with when they are comfortable. Because not everybody is going to take to it very kindly. You have to be very, very careful how you communicate it, and you have to know who you're communicating with. And once you've gotten to a point where the person you are engaging with is comfortable, then you basically come for couples counseling, whether it is your actual partner or friend. And it can be a single session where it's just like, this is what's happening, so that they get a better idea. Because at the end of the day, people tend to listen to other people rather than the person who's communicating to them.
Yes.
So in the cracks, ADHD profile, observe, find out which one of the three, take note of what person is saying is their hurdles while observing what you find to be hurdles within communicating with you. And then take note whether that's actually the root problem, the created problem, or whether it impacts new relationships or existing ones.
Wow, yeah. This is why, that's why I asked you that question. And because it's that thing of finding experts that really understand ADHD is so crucial when getting that support, because you've just done it there, and that, and it's just so crucial to find the right people, to find the right counts, to find the right support, so that you can learn to live with your brain and thrive.
No, I get it. And obviously I don't have ADHD, but I understand I understand the fears and the limitations and the frustration that comes with it, and how just going, your child might suffer from ADHD. Watching a parent's response in this day and age gives me an indication of what society thinks.
Yeah.
And that's where I go, right, we need to dial it back to the root, and we need to dial into it and then see how it's affected you, whether it's for the last 3 years, whether it's for the last 5 years, whether we're going to play with dolls to see how it frustrates you, or whether you're going to talk to me. At the end of the day, my job is to make sure that when you look at yourself in the mirror, you don't see ADHD tattooed on your forehead. You see a diamond in the making, because at the end of the day, you need to accept who you are. I can accept you for the person you are, but that doesn't help if you don't accept who you are.
Yeah, and that's why, just what you said there, I'm going to highlight again, the fact that you have that, you see people with ADHD as that diamond is crucial, that if you have ADHD, to find specific people that are trained and have the perspective that you are a diamond, because when people see it, then hopefully they can help you to see it for yourself.
That's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. So wow, I mean, I'm taking away lots from this. So I know it's not really my takeaway, it's actually listeners' takeaway, but I'm taking lots from this. So any last words?
Believe in yourself, every single last one of you. Just because there's a diagnosis of your head doesn't mean you're not a person. You're still a human. And every single one of you have the right to feel like you're enough. So feel like you're enough because I said so. No, I'm joking. Feel like you're enough because you are. Yeah. It was nice talking to all of you.
Oh, absolute pleasure as always. That was just really great, and I just thought it was really, really crucial, everything you were saying. And I'm going to put some details below. And yeah, where can people find you if they want to find you?
Okay, so I am on Facebook. It's literally called Steppingstones. And then I also have a website, which you can find at www.steppingstonescounselling.online.
I always put people on spot on this. It's like, oh God, I've got to remember it all. But if you didn't grasp that, then it's below anyway in the description. I'll all of her details will be there, Instagram, everything, so that if you want to get in touch and find a professional that really understands it and is trained in this, then look no further. Literally, I'm looking at her right now. And it was really amazing, and for me it's just highlighted so much that I knew, so much that I don't know, so much importance, but also just so much about people finding the right help with the right trained people so they can get the right support and they can see the dire end rather than seeing the diagnosis. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Take care, Indigo Diaries. I'll speak to you soon if she lets me back.
Oh yeah, she definitely will be coming back, don't you worry. I've already wrote down ideas for next ones. So in 2 weeks we'll be dropping a new episode with either series 1 or series 2, and yeah, again, we leave you with an amazing story, an amazing advice, and just amazing information, and an amazing person. Chris is my best friend. And if you're interested in coming on as a guest, or you want to share your story in series 1, then please reach out through our social media avenues or email. And if you want help or any more support in anything that you heard from Alecia today, then her details are below. But I hope you come back, you learn, listen, and experience the world through not my eyes, but our eyes. Why not? Have a great week. You're all diamonds. She said it herself. And we're out.
Dear Diary, as Indigo Hub's process goes on, it makes me stop and wonder, could there be more for us? More light, more experience, and more ways to see the world through our own eyes. I think this journey will be... Shh,